Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Decred In Depth Live. Thank you guys for tuning in this beautiful Monday morning here in Oklahoma. I have a very special guest with me today. Without further ado, Matheus Degiovani.
Hello.
Hello. Welcome. Good morning to you.
Thank you. Good morning.
Very excited to have you on. Give me 1 second. Sorry, I just started getting a little bit of feedback, but it's because I had the live stream open. We're
Yeah,
going
no
to
problem.
just jump right into this. Mateus, you need no introduction. We're going to talk a lot today about the, decentralized treasury and the three new opcodes. But before we do, I want to be able to talk to you a little bit about, the upgrade mechanics. And we had a lot of questions from the Decred community on Twitter. A lot of people interested in learning a little bit more about Lightning Network and ticket splitting and some of your thoughts around that. But at a high level, walk us through the mechanics of a consensus vote upgrade from writing up the code to the code being reviewed to merger.
Okay, so the rough process for performing an on-chain or a consensus upgrade is first someone is going to have an idea about some feature that they want to implement or they want to have working on the chain. Then that idea is going to be discussed on some informal forums or on Reddit or on the chats, and that's going to form the basis for a Politeia proposal. So this proposal is going to be put to a vote and is going to establish a budget, a rough timeline, and a rough spec for the consensus changes, for the set of consensus changes. After that goes to a vote and hopefully approved in Politeia, the actual work of coding the change is going to take place. So that's just the regular standard development work where the developers are going to write the code. The code is going to get reviewed by the other developers, the general community. It's going to get merged, and that is going to generate a new software release, which for the treasury work was version 1.60. After that, or concurrent to that upgrade, we write a full spec for the feature, which is a DCP, a Decred Consensus Proposal, or a Decred Change Proposal. And that DCP is going to very clearly define how the feature is going to work. So it's going to have all the technical details necessary for a different implementation. For example, if we don't have that yet, but if we had a different node written in a different language, that spec would be used to also implement the same change on a different node. So after the full spec and after the work, the code is fully merged, that goes for and released. The miners and the stakeholders have some time to upgrade their running nodes for the new release. So that's the first time that, or the second time that miners and stakeholders have a chance to decide whether they want that feature or not. So the first decision that they make is in funding the work on Politeia. They have a second decision on whether to upgrade their nodes or not. And so presumably if they really didn't want that feature, they could simply not upgrade, though that's usually the case since each release has a bunch of new features and improvements. And so after the upgrade, after both miners and stakeholders upgrade, we go through an on-chain voting process where the stakeholders are going to vote on whether to accept the new consensus rules or not. And so once the stakeholders come to a decision, to a final decision, whether to approve or disapprove this consensus upgrade, assuming it's going to get approved, the new consensus rules are activated. So that's very high level, rough process of upgrade.
No, that was very clear. Thank you for that. What would happen if, say, the miners refuse to upgrade?
So the most immediate action that stakeholders can take is to not vote on blocks produced by miners that haven't upgraded. So that's what version 161 is going to do. It's going to refuse to vote on unupgraded blocks. So since the stakeholders decide that there's a good chance that this new feature that they want this new feature, the stakeholders have a clear desire for this new feature, since they have upgraded it, they are upgrading to the new version. If the miners decide not to upgrade, then they are not going to get their Coinbase reward.
So, what are some of the bottlenecks, strengths, and weaknesses of Decred's consensus change process compared to other cryptocurrencies and open source projects in general?
In terms of open source projects in general, Decred follows it very closely. So all the code produced by Decred developers is open source. So it follows roughly the same processes or the same standards as other open source projects. I think that the greatest asset or the greatest strength or the greatest feature for Decred's governance is that it has a formal process for reaching decisions. So it has a formal process to come to a decision, a final decision on whether to activate or implement or have some feature on the blockchain. So I think that's the greatest asset.
So I want to give a little bit of background before I ask this question. It was asked on Twitter whether someone wanted me to ask you whether you thought these series of opcodes took a long time to develop. And so I want to ask you just a little bit about your philosophy on software development in terms of balancing speed with care and precision, especially when you talk about, hybrid money softwares. Why is it so important that devs be, careful and thinking about the possible failures and attacks? And tell us a little bit about, your philosophy on software development.
So I think there are different levels of demands and different approaches that you need to take on different stages of the software or different layers of the software or different stacks. So you need to have a different approach for consensus level work and for consensus level code than you need for higher level stuff like payment integration, for example. So while it's important to get a payment integration done correctly, it's easier to, for example, upgrade a code that is running your payment gateway, for example, a centralized payment gateway, for example. It's easier to upgrade or to shut it down or to fix problems than it is to release a new version and have every participant of the network upgrade to a new version to fix a bug in consensus code, for example. So it's very important to take different approaches for different levels of the stack. Specifically about consensus code, that obviously needs to be the stricter code because you don't get many chances to upgrade both miners and stakers, and upgrading and activating new rules, for example, is it's probably not as demanding as in Bitcoin, but it's just because the Decred's whole stack is prepared for regular upgrades, so it's probably not as traumatic as upgrading the Bitcoin network, but still some work. It's still work. You need to go to all your miners, all the stakeholders need to upgrade. Many nodes in the peer-to-peer network need to be upgraded. So you don't want to be doing that every other week, for example. You want to have a very stable release that you want to build off your other tools from. And so, for example, in the treasury work, since it's introducing a different abstraction now on the blockchain, on Decred's blockchain. The treasury work is not based on UTXOs, it's based on an account model. So the treasury, the funds for the treasury aren't tracked in outputs, aren't tracked in UTXOs. They are tracked on a specific account on the blockchain, on the state of the blockchain. And so that presented a unique set of challenges to develop and to fix all the small bugs that creep up. So, for example, we had plenty of off by one bugs. We had plenty of bugs that could, for example, lock up the chain if we didn't deal with them correctly. So this new model of accounting was very, very tricky to get right. So that's some of the reason for why it took so long to develop.
Yeah. And with all that being said, someone I'm not a coder, and work on consensus level development. In your opinion, do you feel like it took an appropriate amount of time? Was it too long, or how do you feel about it?
That's a tough question. I mean, in a general sense, everything could always be faster. If we didn't take weekends or had a crunch time, or if we had more consensus level developers looking and working on this thing and testing this, and if we didn't have to juggle every other thing that we also have to juggle, every other work that we also have to do. So maybe it could be strictly a little bit faster, but I think it was done as it needed to be done. It was done carefully, and it was done so that we don't have to have an upgrade a week after we release the code and figure out, oh, forgot this small bug here that completely locks up the thing.
Absolutely. And I want to be able to talk to you later about, attracting new devs and educating devs at the consensus level. But before we jump into that, generally speaking, how do you think Decred has struck a balance in terms of the incentives of stakeholders and wanting developers to push out more and new features and quicker and faster, but then also, sort of the necessity of making sure that devs are not treated like cattle, and that we respect, that these are human beings who have lives, and, just and give respect to the work and the difficulty that it takes. So how do you think that Decred hits that balance?
So I think that Decred it's literally a new way of working for devs. It's a new way for stakeholders in the general sense, not just Decred stakeholders, but stakeholders in a project to have a sort of balance of power among developers, users, and in the case of a blockchain project, miners, POW miners. And this incentive structure is very different, and we sometimes try to relate the standard way of working in a company with a set of hours that you need to work and a set of goals that you need to reach at a certain date and at a certain budget and so on. And it's sometimes we're not exactly, Decred is not exactly that. It's not exactly a standard company where you have a boss that gets to you and says, oh, okay, drop all you're doing and start working on this thing right now, because we need to ship to users in 2 weeks, otherwise user X is going to drop our contract and so on. So it's a completely different way of working. Sometimes maybe there's especially from known developers, there's this perspective that development takes time, and that's sort of true everywhere. Everyone that is not a developer has this perspective that development takes time, and everyone that is a developer usually complains that they don't have enough time to develop the features they want with the appropriate care that they want. So I think that Decred, at least for me as a developer, is an experiment in trying to get development right for all sides. So I think the incentive structure, the balance of power between the stakeholders that are going to ultimately decide whether the developers are going to get paid or not. And this is a big part of the treasury work, trying to balance out the power between the developers and the stakeholders, the owners of the currency. That's a big part of the treasury work. So I think that Decred is a new thing. It's a different thing that we are still trying to figure out how to balance all of these competing demands.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I want to jump now into some of the nitty gritty of the opcodes, the consensus changes that are being proposed. My understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, there are three new opcodes: T-Spen, OpTad, and OpT-Spen plus OpT-Gen. What is an opcode, and can you explain each of these at a high level for the audience?
Okay, so the opcodes are the low level building blocks of smart codes or smart programs. They are the individual operations that a script or a program in the blockchain uses to do its job. So, for example, if you pick a standard coin transfer, if you pick a standard coin transfer transaction, there's a small opcode there called checksig, which asserts that the given coin is owned by the given key, or in other words, that the given key has the right to spend some set of coins. So that's an opcode. Opcode is basically a small function in the smart code language for Decred. These three new opcodes actually they're not terribly magical. They don't do a lot of work. Most of the work is actually done by the consensus rules of the blockchain. But these opcodes, they are used to mark or to identify the various types of transactions that interact with the new treasury. So you have an opcode that tells you, oh, this transaction is adding funds to the treasury, which is the T-add. You have an opcode that says this transaction is generating coins into the treasury, which is the T-gen. And you have the T-Spen, which marks a transaction saying this transaction is spending coins from the treasury. So these opcodes are used to mark the special transactions. As I said, one of the big changes of the treasury is that we're not, the treasury is not output based. It's not UTXO based. It's account based. So you need these special markers in transactions to deal with the treasury. So there isn't a specific output saying, oh, the treasury now has X amount of Decreds in its fund. That's an internal state of the blockchain. You're just saying, oh, I'm debiting, I'm spending X amount of Decreds from the treasury, and that's marked by a T-Spen.
Why is T-Spen so powerful?
As I said, it's not that T-Spen is so powerful. It's not terribly complicated. It's used to mark that a given transaction is spending from the treasury. The cool thing about T-Spend, I think, is that it's not using the standard CDSA signatures. It's using a Schnorr signature, which is probably the first large-scale use of Schnorr signatures in Decred. And so that's an interesting bit of trivia for T-Spend.
How much more participation from stakeholders will be required once the code is activated? Will stakeholders be required to review all the payouts each month from the Treasury and vote on the payout, or will it be similar to voting on Politeia?
The process for paying from the Treasury is going to be slightly different now, but only slightly different, only a little bit different. So most of the steps are going to be similar to how it's been done for the past few months. The contractors are going to submit their invoices. Then there's going to be a domain-specific review of these invoices. So, for example, in development, every developer can see other developers' invoices. So we can do an initial review of each other's work. The DCC proposal actually lays out most of this. So according to the DCC, this is the first step, the in-domain or within-domain review. After that, you can have a now contractor review in case there are problems. So if there's an issue, if there's some conflict, if developers or any contractor is trying to overbill, for example, you can have a now contractor review of the invoice. After that is settled, so the contractors have reached an agreement of a given month's set of invoices, the whole picture of invoices, the whole set of invoices that is going to be billed from the Treasury. Politeia is going to generate a Treasury spend transaction, a T-Spend transaction, and then that's going up for review and voting on chain. So what contractors or what stakeholders are going to have to do is either rely on the contractors for review or review the T-Spend transaction itself. So they're going to have to spend a little bit of time for reviewing the Treasury. Obviously, that review is going to be done by different stakeholders at different levels. So, for example, if I'm not really much of a marketing person, so I can't really review in detail the marketing spends, but I have some idea of how much I think it's worth spending on marketing in a general sense. So if a specific Treasury spend is trying to overspend in the marketing department, I can either raise comments in Politeia, or I can raise comments in social media, in the chats or on Reddit or whatever. And other stakeholders can also do this sort of soft review of the Treasury spend. And then the stakeholders are going to set the voting policy for their wallets. So you can set a policy for always approving or always rejecting T-spends in general, or you can set a policy for individual T-spends. So, for example, if I reviewed this month's Treasury spend transaction specifically, and I'm not satisfied with it, I can set my wallet to reject that specific Treasury spend. So there's going to be some time that stakeholders are going to need to spend to do this sort of review and setting up their voting policy.
So this question that I'm about to ask is kind of off the list of pre-planned questions, but I'm kind of just now starting to understand this, and so I want to make sure that what I think I understand is clear. So this new Treasury account that's being created, the T-Spend allows for all the Treasury spends with this large-scale implementation of Schnorr to all be completely anonymous and untraceable?
Not, I'm not sure completely anonymous and untraceable is exactly right, because the contractors aren't entirely anonymous.
For sure.
So, for example, if someone is reviewing my invoices on Politeia, if other developers are reviewing my invoices on Politeia, they can reasonably accurately determine which outputs are coming to me based on, for example, how many hours I worked and the standard rates of billing. So it's not exactly entirely anonymous and entirely untraceable, but you can deal with that after the payment by using mixing. So for example, contractors, after they receive their payments, they can mix their coins. So after the payment itself happens, you can sort of achieve some protection, or a lot of protection added by mixing against external observers and against other contractors based on your spending patterns. So, for example, if I'm mixing my coins after I received my payments, while there's a reasonable assumption, while other developers or other contractors can have some idea of how much I received, it's not so much. It's not as clear how much I'm spending, how much I'm staking, and so on. So you have a lot more added privacy by combining the treasury spend transactions with mixing.
I makes a lot of sense. So this was a question that came up on Twitter. As a new contractor, I'm not actually able to answer this yet, but maybe you could just explain to stakeholders, as a contractor, how do you get paid from the treasury? Like, what's sort of on your back end process? How does that work?
Well, that's exactly the process. That's pretty much today the exact same process as I described for when the treasury is activated. So you submit invoices. Those invoices are reviewed. The difference today is that the transaction that withdraws from the treasury is not reviewed prior to being published, since the treasury isn't yet decentralized. So that specific transaction is done by specific people, and it's signed by specific people, by the holders of the current treasury wallet keys. But other than that, it's pretty similar to what I described for the decentralized treasury.
Absolutely. I want to transition now to talking a little bit about Lightning Network. You've done interviews in the past on Decred in Depth talking a lot about Lightning, and I encourage everyone to go watch those, and I'll have those in the description. But why is Lightning Network so important? And alongside that, do you think Lightning is overrated, underrated, or properly rated today?
That's a tough question, because different people are going to rate Lightning differently. So I think that it's Lightning, or the concept of the Lightning network as a second layer, as a second level network, as a second level scaling solution is definitely necessary. Any blockchain based on the Bitcoin idea of having a single blockchain with limited on-chain capacity is going to need a second level solution for scaling, and that applies to Decred as well. So it's definitely something that is needed. Whether Lightning, as it currently is the solution for scaling, I don't think it is as it is now. I think there's a lot of improvements that are needed in Lightning, especially regarding what I call episodic wallets. That is, wallets that come online only for limited interaction with the Lightning Network. Lightning, as it stands today, is geared towards long-lived nodes. So you put up your Lightning node and it's going to be online most of the time. So I think there's still a lot of improvements that are needed in the general architecture of Lightning.
How will Lightning on Decred compare to Lightning on Bitcoin? Is Decred better suited for heavier Lightning usage? What are some obvious Lightning use cases on Decred? Thank you, Permeable Nino, for that question.
I'm not sure it's more suited than Bitcoin's Lightning Network. Decred has also due to having staking, due to the staking capabilities of Decred, there are possible interactions between Lightning Network and the staking subsystem that we haven't really explored yet. We don't yet know how staking is going to influence Lightning because in a certain sense, Lightning for Bitcoin, for example, is a way for you to allocate your Bitcoin capital towards having some useful thing happening in the network. So, for example, if you're running a Lightning Hub node, you can allocate your capital, your BTC, to grow your node and have more connections and earn routing fees from that capital that you're allocating on the Lightning Network. On the other hand, since Decred has the staking, there's already an assumption that if you are a long-term Decred user, you're probably putting your coins to work on staking. So in a certain sense, Decred's Lightning is competing with Decred staking for funds. So so that interaction isn't exactly clear yet how it's going to play out. I'm not sure whether that's going to increase Lightning's usage because Decred Lightning nodes may have to ask for larger fees to offset the possible opportunity cost of not staking those coins. I'm not sure whether the Decred Lightning hubs are going to be maybe more altruistic than Bitcoin's nodes, since the nodes don't really need to have so much, since nodes have an alternative in the form of staking. So there's an interaction, there's an incentive structure there. There's an economic interaction that I'm not sure it's really clear whether that's going to make Decred's Lightning larger or not. In that sense, one of the obvious use cases for Decred specific Lightning is for multi-owner tickets, which I published a set of posts last year about how trying to come up with a pre-solution or a general architecture for multi-owner tickets. So I think that we're going to see a lot of interaction between Lightning and the staking system.
That's a great segue into the next question, which are what are some of the most exciting developments in the Lightning pipeline?
So I think that the most exciting development that I think it's useful or that's going to be useful are PTLCs, which are a different type of payment mechanism in Lightning. Today, Lightning is entirely based on hash challenges. So you have, if you want to receive a payment in Lightning, you generate a random string, a random number, and you apply a hash into this number, and this hash is used to bind the payment across all nodes from the sender to the receiver in the Lightning Network. PTLCs use sort of the same concept, but instead of a hash challenge, it's a point challenge, an elliptic curve challenge. So instead of generating a random number and a hash challenge, you generate a random private key, and you bind the payment to the public key corresponding to that private key. and that allows a large number of interesting operations. You can build escrow operations in Lightning. You can build decentralized oracles. You can build decentralized contracts in Lightning based on elliptic curve arithmetic or algebra or math in general. So that's a very interesting development that I think it's going to be able to show a lot of interesting use cases for Lightning.
Yeah. Yes. Some of that went over my head, but a use case that I'm very interested in. This is my own selfish question. Are you familiar with the game Light Night? It's like the Satoshi games, and they're kind of building like a Halo version, but like you it's kind of like Halo, except you win Bitcoin on the Lightning Network. Are you familiar with this?
I'm familiar in passing. I've heard about it, but I haven't really looked too closely.
Do you think anything like that is possible on Decred in the future?
It's possible the same way it's possible today. If it's possible on Bitcoin's Lightning Network, it's possible on Decred's because they're very closely related. The code is very closely related. The concepts are closely related. So pretty much anything that is possible on Bitcoin's network is possible on Decred's network. What I think it's probably going to happen is that we're going to have cross-coin payments between the networks before necessarily having Decred specific Lightning applications. So I think that, and this is one of the things that PTLCs help to do safely, which is cross-coin payments. I think we're going to see that first, and before we have Decred specific Lightning applications.
Well, what are you have written posts about ticket splitting. What are your thoughts about ticket splitting today? And do you think it's possible that ticket splitting could help drive Lightning usage on Decred? You've kind of already answered that, but.
Yes, I've kind of answered that, but I think that so just to give a little context on ticket splitting, since I'm the one that worked on the original implementation. So it was pretty clear once we were working on version 160 that ticket splitting as it was or as it is implemented today wouldn't work because there are several architectural differences in the new accountless ESP mode. So the multi-owner tickets need a new protocol, a new interaction mode with the wallet, because the DCR wallet now has some added protections against external clients connecting to it. So there's going to need some additional. It was clear while we were working on 160 that the existing multi-owner ticket or split ticket client wouldn't work on V160. And so I decided not to work immediately on it and try to work harder towards bringing multi-owner tickets to Lightning. So that's sort of what I've been under the covers of darkness and in my little retreat. I've been working towards that, slowly working towards that, besides every other stuff that I need to do as well. But since 160 has been released, there's been a steady increase in the price, in Decred's price. So that might change a little bit of my plans if that continues for a bit longer, because the price of tickets now is it's much larger than it was like 3 or 4 months ago.
Absolutely.
So that might prompt me to change a little bit my strategy.
Absolutely. How can this is kind of moving off from Lightning Network, and there are some questions that are popping up in the chat. I'm sure you see those, or hopefully you do. And if we have time, maybe we can return to those at the end. But I think we've gotten to kind of most of them in some way or another. Turning now to attracting developers. How can Decred continue to attract developers to work on DCR other than price go up? And what are your thoughts on educational program funded by the DAO geared towards teaching people?
So I think that uh, the I think that it's important that the price. I think the most important thing about the price increase is that it allows the treasury to fund more work. So I think that's a positive thing. Uh, how to attract developers for a decentralized project? That's a tougher challenge. Tough. That's a difficult question to answer. I think that an educational program. I'm not sure the Treasury would be well equipped to fund that sort of thing. I think that maybe, obviously, that depends on the proposal. So I'd have to judge specific proposals. It's hard to say that the DAO should or shouldn't do X before knowing what X is at the level of a Politeia proposal. But I think maybe something similar to the Lempe School proposal of training training developers and then not receiving the rewards or receiving the receiving as payments a part of the developer's salary, an X percentage of developer salary. Maybe something like that could be imagined for the DAO. I don't have any more specific ideas than that. That's more of a shower thought,
For sure.
and that's not at the level of a concrete idea. But maybe something like that, where some group is going to try and train future contractors or future developers, but is only going to receive the payment from the DAO after such developers themselves are getting paid. So maybe something like that. But that's, as I said, that's more of a shower thought than a concrete idea.
Absolutely. And that's what Decred in Depth is for those shower thoughts. This question, I know there's a lot of kind of misunderstanding and not being a super technical guy. I'm sorry if this sounds ignorant, but is smart contracts on Decred ever going to be a thing? And I know there's a lot of misunderstanding and misconception about exactly what is a smart contract, but if you can understand that question in a shower thought kind of way, do you have an answer to that?
So the pedantic answer is that smart contracts are already a thing in Decred because the script that, for example, allows us to spend from the treasury or add funds to the treasury, that's a smart contract already. The scripts that allow you to spend your regular coins are smart contracts. There are several advanced uses for contracts. For example, Lightning Network is entirely based on having more complex smart contracts running in the network. So that's already a thing. What people usually talk about when saying that Decred is not going to have smart contracts or should Decred have smart contracts is about Turing complete smart contracts. That is contracts, programs, software that allows you to do basically anything you want without bounds. And I really, really don't see that coming to the lowest level of the Decred blockchain. I really think that's not going to happen.
And I just want to make sure for the audience, that's because it would create blockchain bloat, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
So smart contracts are really hard to audit, are hard to evaluate. The concept of Turing completeness means that you can basically do in a very high level, in a very high level way, you can basically do whatever you want. You can do as much with the smart contract as you can do with a regular computer. So it's really hard to set bounds for a contract. And if you are going to need bounds anyway, then you don't necessarily need a Turing complete contract. So PTLCs, for example, allow you to do off-chain contracts. You can bind some very complex logic to revealing a specific payment scalar, a specific private key. So you can do a lot of interesting applications or off-chain smart contracts once you have PTLCs in Lightning, for example.
I'll have to do more research on PTLCs. What problems do you see for Bitcoin that Decred can overcome because of governance?
So this goes back to one of the things that I said at the start, that having a formal way to come to an agreement, to having a formal way to make a decision on features or on conflicts is something that I think is very valuable when compared to Bitcoin's rough consensus way of deciding things. I think there are trade-offs on both approaches, but I think that there's going to be a lot of value in having a blockchain project that has a strict and formal method of solving conflicts, of solving governance conflicts in general.
This question came from Twitter, and I think I understand what's being asked, but it's kind of silly. Is Decred's governance process permissionless and able to withstand nation-state interference?
It's definitely permissionless because anyone can purchase a ticket. You don't even need to use a VSP to purchase a ticket. That's just an easier way to manage tickets using VSPs, but you can do the blockchain itself is permissionless, so you can put up a node on the blockchain without having to get a stamp of approval from some entity. And in the same way, you can put up a voting wallet. You can purchase Decred in any way that you can come up with. You can purchase this in the market, or you can purchase this, or you can mine it from using a POW miner. So you can acquire coins in a permissionless way, and you can vote in a permissionless way. So yes, it's definitely permissionless. Now, if it's able to withstand interference from a nation state, that's a tough question, because it depends on what level of interference you want to protect against. So we know that there are nation states that don't shy away from like poisoning their adversaries or dropping bombs on their adversaries. So that really depends on how much you want to protect, or how much you feel you are protected. There are obvious things that you can do to guard from that. So, for example, in case of a large stakeholder, they can defend themselves by having multiple voting wallets in geographically distant places. They can vote via Tor to further hide where they are. So there are several steps that you can do to improve your interference ability or the interference ability from third parties, but that's on a spectrum. There isn't a specific answer, yes or no. Are we able to defend ourselves? That's definitely a spectrum.
Absolutely. This question comes from Ellie Herf. He's been a long-time contributor to my podcast and Decred community in general. He asks, he has this vision for Decred where he's able to open up Decrediton and he's able to just click a button and his Decred is allocated to a trustworthy VPN and it's added to a ticket splitting pool and all he did was click a button. Is this a daydream?
So the existing ticket splitting tool is not terribly far from that. So it's basically a tool that you run, a small. You can run it on the command line, or you can run it on a GUI, a GUI. And it's a small tool that you run. You click a button, participate or join the ticket splitting process, and then it does its thing, and you come up with the tickets afterwards. So the only additional step on the existing tool is that you need to set it. You need to do a little bit of setup. You need to download it separately and run it separately from the wallet. So that would be the only difference between his vision and what is possible today would be that. The reason that I haven't integrated the ticket splitting tool in Decrediton directly is twofold. So first, there are still outstanding problems with voting amplification attacks, especially with the Politeia voting rights today, because today the largest output in the ticket transaction is the one that has voting rights.
I think that we have maybe lost Matteo just for a second, so I'm going to just improv until hopefully he reconnects. I think he's here. I see him in the green screen. Okay, you're back.
A little network hiccup there. I'm not sure how much you got that, but just to backtrack a little bit, the most important reason for not including the split ticket tool in the Decrediton is because there are concerns about voting amplification attacks, specifically regarding Politeia voting rights. So we need to do a consensus rule change to have a specific voting key for Politeia rights when compared to on-chain voting rights. There are some questions about how to. There's an open problem about how to assign the voting rights, the on-chain voting rights in the tickets, because today I kind of cheat a little bit in that I generate every possible ticket in a pool, in a split ticket pool session. I generate every possible ticket for where each possible participant is voting, and then just select one, and that's not great either. I need to have a cryptographic way of assigning the voting rights, which I don't have yet. And so there are some technical, low-level technical problems for why that tool hasn't been integrated in the Decrediton. Just to give a little bit of context, a couple of weeks ago, I ran an account, and we on the actual blockchain, on the low-level blockchain, and we had in about 2 years, almost 3 years, we had about 2,700, a little bit less than 2,700 split tickets. So so we had an average of about 81 tickets. That's an average of about 81 tickets, split tickets a month. So there is some demand for it. But even though it's not that much hard to purchase, you just need to download a second software and connect it to the existing wallet. The actual demand for purchasing the split tickets wasn't that great. And so that was another reason for why I didn't devote so much time in bringing it up to speed on the new accountless VSP mode and integrating in the Crediton.
I have two more questions for you, and then I'm going to let you go. This last, or the second to last one, just came in the chat. What tips do you have for a beginner who wants to become a developer and maybe aspires to have some code merged one day in Decred?
So I can only tell my own story. I can only say that for me at least it was reasonably easy, because I started out contributing to the Crediton, which is mostly HTML and CSS and JavaScript. So in terms of language knowledge, I already had it, and it was just a matter of domain-specific knowledge or Decred-specific knowledge or project-specific knowledge. And the only way I know how to acquire that knowledge is to just do stuff. Just I picked up an extended weekend. I tried to come up with an interesting thing to do. I tried to come up with something that I wanted to have done, to something that I wanted to be running on the Crediton, and then I just tried to figure out steps that I needed to do to have that thing running. So, for example, one of the things that I wanted to do was to have translation for the UI. I really wanted to get the UI translated. So I just tried to backtrack from that. So if I want to have a translated UI, which steps do I need to do? So I need to do this first and that first and that first. And then I picked the smallest thing that I could figure out how to do. Also, smallest thing was, for me specifically, was changing an icon on a certain screen that was showing up the wrong icon. And then I started from there. Just picked that, fixed that thing, sent a PR. Then I picked the next thing and sent a PR. Then I picked the next thing and sent a PR. And then I just try to figure out what the next step is from where you are.
I think that's great advice. This last question is an edited version of Alt Andy's question. Again, another contributor to my podcast, and I'll hopefully have a previous episode with him linked as well for people. He says, pick 3 other crypto projects. I can't even name 3 other crypto projects that have treasury and a governance, and how does Decred compare? But I guess the edited version of that is, how does Decred compare to any other crypto projects that have treasuries and governance, in your opinion?
That's a tough thing for me to answer as well. I don't know 3 projects in enough depth to be able to answer that with any sort of balance or fairness, both to Decred and the other projects. But at least on a very high level, I can see a lot of projects moving towards having sort of the same high-level feature set that Decred has had since day one. So a lot of projects that started out following Bitcoin's funding model or an ICO funding model are switching to using a treasury, and many projects that didn't or were trying to emulate Bitcoin's rough consensus development model switched or are switching or are testing out a way to have proposals and budgets and reviews for invoices and so on, which is this sort of the same process that Decred has had since day one. So the general feel that I have, but this is entirely this is an opinion. This is an opinion and obviously biased opinion because I'm a Decred developer. Is that a lot of projects are sort of converging on Decred's model for development. For development. So even Bitcoin, we see a lot of stuff like trying to come up with independent funds or independent entities to fund Bitcoin development, and that sort of resembles or sort of, I can't say it's inspired because I don't know. As I said, I don't know them enough in detail to say they were inspired by Decred, but they certainly resonate or certainly resemble the Decred model.
I think that's a very fair assessment. Matheus, someone just referred to as the Lightning King. I like that. Thank you very much for your time. Anything else that you'd like to leave with the audience before we end?
Yeah. So there's one thing that we didn't address in all the treasury talk, which is the safety of the treasury funds, and it's very important for stakeholders, since the stakeholders are going to have to come up with a decision on whether to approve or not the decentralization of the treasury as it exists in the current version of the code. So one thing we didn't address is that the funds for the treasury, they are protected not only by the voting itself, but there are several restrictions about how to spend funds from the treasury. So the spending funds from the treasury can only happen on the special treasury spend transactions. These transactions need to be signed by special Politeia keys. So only a few people can create valid treasury spend transactions. After that, these transactions need to be voted, and there's a limit of 7 transactions per vote. So there is a hard limit on how many T-spend transactions are being voted at any given time. And there's also limits on how much each individual treasury spend can spend from the treasury, and how much the set of all treasury spend transactions can spend from the treasury within a given window, within a given policy windows, which is about a month, if I'm not mistaken. So all the treasury spends for a given policy window can only spend up to 150% of the previous window. So, for example, if we spend 1,000 DCR now, we can only spend 1,500 DCR on next month, so that we can ensure that the treasury isn't drained from funds from, for example, a mistaken T-spend, or if the T-spend key is somehow hacked or stolen, or even if the owner of the treasury, the Politeia keys, tries to generate a T-spend transaction that spends all of the funds to themselves, for example. There are low-level consensus rules that prevent such large withdrawals from the treasury. So there are a lot of protections in place to prevent the treasury from being completely defunded.
Thank you for that. Is there anything else that I missed that you think needs to be addressed for the stakeholders to know, in regards to the consensus changes?
I think that's the gist of it. Obviously, there are a lot of low-level details for how voting takes place. There for how votes are accounted for. There are a lot of very small details and very intricate details on the consensus rules, but that's just the nature of the of consensus work.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you for your time. To everyone watching, thank you all for tuning in. If you don't think there's anything else, we will end the stream here. Matheus Degiovani, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for the audience. And obviously, if there are any additional questions, we can answer on the chats or via any other methods or on Twitter and so on.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for tuning in. Take care.